The shy girl painted in darkness so no one would see, but each brushstroke was quietly watched by a mysterious millionaire night after night. When the world finally uncovered her gift, she was forced to choose: stay hidden in the shadows, or step into the light and risk losing everything. Because some people aren't born to be seen. They're born to touch the things no one dares to speak aloud. What will she choose? Come with us and listen to the story of her journey. When the city began to hum itself to sleep under the hush of amber streetlights, when car horns grew sparse and window after window flicked into darkness, only then did Yumi begin to prepare to leave her room. She left no note, gave no warning. No one would know. She gathered her worn paint tubes, brushes whittled down nearly to the stem, a dark-stained handkerchief, and a notebook with a spine long since unbound. Everything went into a charcoal-grey tote bag, the kind people wouldn't bother picking up if found on the street. Her roommate was already asleep, a thin blanket pulled over her head, breathing slow beneath the steady whir of the fan. Yumi moved like a shadow, careful not to let the room make a sound, as if the air itself were made of glass. Outside the dormitory, the early November air brushed cold against her neck, and she tugged her collar tighter. She carried no phone, wore no watch, yet somehow she always arrived at the same time, 11:03 p.m. The alley she sought lay behind an old print shop shuttered for over 4 years. No one gave the back wall a second glance, just a patchwork of bricks streaked with grime and moss, flaking in uneven layers like old scars never healed. But to Yumi, it was a blank space, a silence in her soul that begged to be filled. She set her bag down, tied her hair back, and opened the first tube of paint. The acrid scent of acrylic rose thick in the air, but it didn't bother her. To her, it was the smell of another world, one where she could breathe without needing to be understood. Tonight, she painted a face. A woman's face, long, eyes, delicate lashes, and a half-formed smile. But the eyes did not smile. They looked far away at someone no longer there. Each brushstroke was a breath exhaled. She painted quickly, without pause, not from fear of being caught, but from fear the feeling might fade before it could be kept. A cat cried out somewhere in the distance. A heavy truck passed down the road, but between her and the wall there was only stillness. When the portrait neared completion, Yumi stepped back a few paces. She studied it in full, then dragged a fingertip down from one eye, a single tear trailing down. She left a mark like that every night, a crack, a flaw that kept the painting from ever being called beautiful. Because in her world, beauty had to be broken, imperfect, but true. When the church bell nearby struck once for midnight, Yumi packed up. She never stayed past 12. Not out of fear, but because she believed if she crossed that line, the art would no longer belong to her. Back in her room, she didn't turn on the lights. The soft glow of the computer screen in sleep mode was enough. She sat on the floor, opened her notebook. The last page held a faint sketch of a face still unfinished, wide eyes, distant, as if looking into some other realm. She added a single line, then stopped. From the other bed, her roommate's voice came, muffled with sleep. "You're still going to that place, Ma? Someone said there's a camera there." Yumi didn't answer right away. She only nodded, then murmured like, "Wind brushing past. If the camera's blurry, it can't really see anyone." Not far from that alley, in a darkened room on the 3rd floor of the building opposite, a man sat by the window, binoculars resting in his hand. He wasn't young, but not yet old. His face lay in shadow, but his gaze lingered on the wall. Yumi had just left. On the table before him lay a notebook, within it a perfect replica of the painting she'd just made. Not a photograph, a hand-drawn copy, down to the tilted tear. He scribbled a note in the margin. "These eyes, I drew them 10 years ago." Beside it, an old photograph, a group shot from a freshman art class, a small girl in a baseball. Cap sat in the far left corner, farthest from the center, but her gaze even then mirrored the one from tonight's wall. In the alley, the shadows deepened, and a faint blue light began to blink above the wall. A hidden mini-camera had been recording for who knows how long, but clearly someone had been watching, every movement, every brushstroke, every flickering smile. And as Yumi disappeared down the street, the figure behind the camera stayed still. His fingers rested lightly against the wall, right where the tear had been. He didn't wipe it away and didn't draw anything over it, and he simply stood there and remembered. The next morning, the city woke beneath a veil of pale mist, as if someone had draped a white gauze over everything. The world was quieter than usual, the sky, the streets, even people's thoughts. In that hush, Yumi walked slowly, her sneakers worn at the heel, the hem of her coat brushing gently against her leg with every step. Last night she hadn't painted. No strokes, no shapes, no color. She had simply sat for a long time before the wall that once held her. Every secret, now wiped clean. No explanation, just a single line. You paint with your soul. The words pressed against her eyelids every time she blinked. Not fear, not anger. Just that strange ache of being touched in a place she thought she'd locked away forever. In class that morning, she sat still while the lecturer's voice drifted like wind through the room. A shaft of sunlight fell across her notebook, but her mind was elsewhere. A classmate leaned over and asked quietly, "You okay? Oh, you look like you got lost somewhere." Yumi didn't answer. She didn't need to. What she felt couldn't be wrapped in the neatness of polite words. At lunch, she stopped by the usual cafe, ordered a glass of water. When the barista asked again, she simply smiled. Yeah, just water. By the window, she watched people pass, each stride, each fleeting expression, each hurried life. She wondered, had anyone ever stopped in front of that wall? Had anyone truly seen? The words returned. You paint with your soul. Not praise, not judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement from someone watching, yet unseen. That afternoon, she returned to the old alley, her old refuge. The morning rain had left puddles smeared across the concrete. The wall was bare now, more hollow than ever. Yumi didn't open her bag, didn't move. She just stood and stared. Somehow, the emptiness hit harder than any image could, because here she had lived. Truly, clearly, she sat down, leaned against the opposite wall. In that moment, she wished she could shrink, become the little girl who once doodled on walls without fearing scoldings. Back then, drawing was instinct, not purpose, not legacy. Now, it was different. Someone had seen, had wiped it clean, had left behind a sentence that made her question everything she thought she'd buried. That night, she dreamt the wall turned into a door. Behind it, a blinding white space. At the center stood the woman from her painting. Same. Eyes same half smile, same crooked tear. But this time she looked straight at Yumi and said, "Don't stop." Yumi jolted awake. In the soft yellow of the nightlight, she opened her notebook and began sketching. A faint figure behind glass, face unclear, but achingly familiar. The next morning, when she opened her door, something fell at her feet. A small folded note, no name. She unfolded it. Just one line. "I'll keep watching. Not to judge. Just to remember." The words echoed like a soundless chord vibrating inside her. A comfort or a warning, and she couldn't tell. But somehow, it made her want to paint again. Not for anyone. Not to be seen. Just to once more live, fully through every stroke of the brush. If it were you, how would it feel to have the whole world see the pain you once tried to hide? Leave one word to describe how you feel right now. For 3 days, Yumi read and reread the note. She didn't carry it with her, didn't tuck it into her sketchbook. It stayed by the window, flipped and fluttered by the wind, as if even the paper couldn't decide whether to hold on or let. Koitoone. The message was short, almost cruel in its clarity. No name, no hint, and that made it linger longer in her mind than anything else. "I'll keep watching. Not to judge, just to remember." That night the wind carried both damp and dust. No rain, yet the air was wet. Not cold, yet the skin felt tight, like after a quiet touch. She returned to the wall for the first time in 4 nights. Her steps were slow, heavy, as though she was walking back into a memory not quite ready to be reborn. The alley looked the same. No one had fixed it, no one had destroyed it, no one cared. But for Yumi, the silence had changed. It was no longer a shield. It had become a mirror reflecting her tangled longing to remain hidden and her fragile wish for someone, just one person, to truly see. She opened her bag. For the first time in days, the paint tubes had dried. At the tips, the brushes stiff from neglect. Still, she tried. Her hands trembled as she twisted open the caps, but she painted no outlines, no sketches, just a face, ambiguous, genderless, with eyes that seemed to know something and were too afraid to speak it. She didn't add color, didn't sharpen the edges, didn't brighten the light, only blurred layers, smeared like stifled emotion. She painted like someone who might never paint again. When she finally set her last brush on the concrete and stepped back, her hands were aching with fatigue. Before her was an unfinished portrait, raw, almost painful in its honesty. Those eyes again looked towards someone who wouldn't come. She sat there a long while. No more painting, no more thinking, not even sure what she was waiting for. Then, without a sound, she packed up and walked away. She didn't look back. The next morning, class began with an analysis of classical portraiture. The professor asked, "What gives a painting its soul?" A few students raised their hands. Technique, light, composition, perspective. Yumi sat still, head lowered. She didn't speak. But in her mind, the answer came clear. It's what you don't paint. That afternoon, instead of the usual cafe, she walked straight to the alley. In daylight, no hoodie, no attempt to blend in. She came with a quiet bravery distilled from too many sleepless nights. But when she turned the corner, her steps halted. It was gone. All of it. Not a trace of color, not a single brush stroke. No eyes watching. Nothing remained. The wall had returned to its former self, a blank, gray, indifferent surface. Yumi stood there for a long time. Her arms hung limp. The fabric bag slipped from her shoulder and fell to the ground. She didn't bend to pick it up. Maybe she should cry, maybe she should scream, but she did neither. She just stood there as though her body had forgotten how to respond to being hurt. Images flickered through her mind. The trembling, nights with brush in hand, a cat's cry cutting through the dark, the dim flicker of the streetlight, the words, "You paint with your soul." And finally, the eyes she painted just the night before. Nothing lasts. No painting. No pain. But no trust either is strong enough to endure when every trace has been erased. Yumi walked away. Not back to the dorm, but to somewhere. Hell, somewhere inside her no one had yet reached. In her room, she opened her bag, not to take anything out, but to empty it completely. Each tube of paint, each brush, her sketchbook. One by one, she tossed them into the trash like peeling off layers of herself. Not slowly, not sentimentally, just necessarily. The handkerchief, the one she always used to wipe. Paint, wipe hands, wipe the tears that sometimes slipped out. That she kept, folded it neatly, slipped it into a drawer, slammed it shut. No one can destroy an artist's passion, but some nights, it's the artist who does it themselves, to survive the weight of believing again. That night, she didn't leave. Her room, didn't turn on the lights, didn't open her laptop. She just sat on her bed in the dark, listening to the quiet tap of the first seasonal rain on the eaves. For the first time in years, she didn't dream. There was only white space, blank, unending, and without a place to land. There was no warning, no chime, no knock on the door. Just the same silent room, the rain falling in soft, steady rhythm, as if to lull the world to sleep. Yumi thought she was still hidden, still safe. But the next morning, when she reached for her phone out of habit, everything had changed. A message popped up in the class group chat. "Yumi, is this you in the video?" Below it, more messages. Old friends, surprised, amazed, impressed. Her breath caught as she saw the YouTube link. She didn't have to click it. Her heart had already dropped. The video was under 3 minutes and shot from afar. But the light, the hair, the silhouette, the movements of the brush beneath the night sky, it was her. Undeniably her. Her. In a moment she had thought, was hers alone, just her and the wall in the quiet dark, now broadcast to thousands of eyes. She didn't move. Beneath the video, the comments scrolled endlessly. Praise, comparisons, words of wonder. But the cruel ones, just a few, cut deepest, staged to get attention. Bet she knew she was being filmed. Midnight painting? Who's buying that? Yumi didn't cry, but her throat tightened. Her hand slipped from the phone, shut her laptop, shoved everything into a drawer like slamming the door before a storm, but the video wasn't in the drawer anymore. It had moved past her, out into a world she no longer controlled. That afternoon she didn't go to class, didn't return to the alley. She walked, nowhere in particular. Every passing face felt like judgment. Familiar streets felt foreign. Each step echoed the same quiet question. What if? What if no one had filmed her? What if the painting had been erased again? What if she'd never been seen? She caught her reflection in a public mirror. Tangled hair, shadowed eyes. But what stopped her wasn't her appearance. It was the haunting feeling that she was looking at someone else entirely. Someone who had lost the last layer keeping her safe from harm. That night, alone in her room, Yumi opened her sketchbook. The last page held a half-formed face, vague, undefined. She picked up a pen, set it down, picked it up again, 10 times. Then, in the margin, she wrote, "I don't know who I am and when everyone can see me." The next morning, when she opened her door, another folded note dropped to her feet. No name, no explanation, just a link. She clicked it. Another. Video. A continuation of that same night. After she had gone, the camera kept rolling. A man appeared in the frame. Tall, long coat, dark gloves. He didn't erase the painting, didn't take a photo. He simply stood there for a long time, then took out a notebook, scribbled a few lines and walked away. No sound. No caption. But the silence said everything. Below the clip, no likes, no comments, just a single line pinned to the top. There are some shadows we choose to follow, not to own them, but to remember who we used to be. Yumi stared. For a long while. Read it again. And again, and for the first time in days she exhaled. Long, soft, full. It wasn't an ending. Not a beginning either. But perhaps just enough for her to choose not to disappear. After days of letting everything drift by like water flowing through the veins of the city, Yumi had grown accustomed to not knowing what came next. She stopped checking social media, stopped reading messages, stopped noticing glances in classroom. Hallways. Something in her had curled inward, like a seed pressed deep beneath cold soil. Not dead, but with no reason yet to grow again. Until that morning, the letter arrived as she stood, absent-minded, in front of the dormitory mailboxes. Not expecting anything, just clinging to an old high school habit. Her fingers touched an ivory envelope with no return address. The paper was thick, faintly scented, chosen with care. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the lines, and the further she read, the more her hands began to tremble. Embossed silver. Letters, a formal invitation in a scheduled time, a renowned gallery, all spelled out with precision, and at the very bottom, the words that made her heart falter. To the artist whose soul speaks through silence, your exhibition is ready, funded, curated, and loved anonymously, and no name, no signature, only that final sentence, like a fingertip brushing against the quietest place inside her. She sat down on a stone bench near the dorm gates, still clutching the letter, like it might vanish if she let go. Her heart was a landscape of contradictions, half lit with hope, half dimmed by disbelief, and it was all too much and too beautiful, too sudden, too unlike anything she'd ever let herself believe she deserved. She didn't know how to respond, didn't know who to ask for reassurance, didn't even know if anyone had ever truly seen her as an artist, rather than just the girl who paints in secret at night. The letter required no reply, offered no instructions, yet it stated one thing with absolute clarity. The exhibition was happening. If she chose to show up, That afternoon, she made her way to the gallery, mentioned in the letter, just to look. She didn't go inside. From across the street, she watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows where white light bathed every frame within. The space was so quiet, so clean, it felt like another world. A world where art was named, priced, seen, preserved. She couldn't picture her paintings there. Not because she was afraid, but because she'd never allowed herself to imagine that far. A car horn jolted her back to reality. She took a few steps back, turned away. But inside her, a question had begun to rise, clearer with each passing moment. Who? Who had seen her? Who had watched not to judge, but simply to remember? As dusk fell, she retraced her old paths, the alleys, the narrow lanes where she used to paint each night, hoping to stumble on a clue. But there was nothing. The corners were quiet again. No brush strokes, no words, no watching. Eyes. That evening she poured herself a glass of water and sat beneath the soft amber glow of her desk lamp. The letter still lay on the table, a shard of light in a grey space. She opened her sketchbook, turned through abandoned pages, rough outlines she had once meant to finish, now trembling with the residue of old, uncertain days. The tremble wasn't in the lines, it was in the fear that maybe she'd never had permission to be seen. In the middle of a blank page, she wrote, "If this is a dream, then at least it's the dream I once forgot I had." Close to midnight, she opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. The internet was slow. Her hands typed cautiously. But for the first time, she searched the name of the gallery and froze. It was real, verified, detailed, elegantly presented. On the gallery's official site, the exhibition calendar had been updated. Solo exhibition, untitled works, anonymous artist, opening next week. Below the banner, a single image, not a face, just a figure, a girl with her head. Jayatuld, brush in hand, standing before a wall beneath the soft blur of a street lamp. Yumi recognized her own posture, not a stolen shot. It was a photo someone had held onto. For maybe a very long time she stared at the screen. There was no anger, no panic, only a new breath. Deeper, calmer, as if, after all these years, she was finally stepping into the space she'd only ever watched from a distance. Some truths don't arrive with a sound. They don't burst into the room with drama or fanfare. They slip quietly through the cracks of intuition, impossible to name, yet impossible not to feel. Yumi had lived in that state for 3 days since learning of the exhibition. In her chest, the phrase "anonymous patron" began sketching out its own imagined identities. A reclusive collector, a former professor who'd seen the video, maybe even a stranger passing by. But one image clung to her thoughts, blurred, distant, yet sharpening with time. A pair of eyes that had once watched her through the stillness of a first-year art class, where she always sat in the back, face hidden in a sketch pad. Ren, a name that hadn't surfaced in years. They had never spoken, only shared a few courses. He had always been quiet, withdrawn, not arrogant, just unreachable. Once she'd seen him sketching the hand of a homeless man in a cafe. The lines he drew stayed with her, not because they were beautiful, but because they seemed drawn from memory, from something unfinished inside him. She searched his name online, and this time, it didn't take much. Ren was now a startup, investor in creative technology, rarely in the media but known enough to be found. His photo on a magazine profile, head turned, eyes looking away, made her breath catch. There was something in that gaze, familiar, unsettling. That afternoon, Yumi received a call from the gallery. A woman's voice, calm and precise. "Hello, Ms. Yumi. We'd like to invite you to review the gallery layout. And the patron will be there if you're willing to meet." Willing. That word repeated in her mind like an echo. She wasn't sure what she was willing for, but she knew she couldn't run anymore. The gallery, in the soft hush of late afternoon, felt like a library. The walls held test prints from the video, frames frozen mid-brushstroke, Scans from her old sketchbook, the one she'd thrown away and someone had recovered. Even the originals, pieces she thought were lost, now preserved behind glass like artifacts of a language never spoken aloud. And then he stepped in. No introduction, no warning. Ren stood across the room, tall, coat draped over his frame, gaze unchanged. Maybe quieter now, maybe softer. But still the same gaze that had once passed through space, not to observe her, but to hold something of her in silence. Yumi didn't speak. She only looked. Ren didn't rush. He walked to one painting, the one she'd made in the rain. Thinking no one was watching, he said nothing of brushwork, nothing of technique. He just asked gently, as if the words had been waiting years, "You still paint the same way?" She nodded, then silence until she whispered, almost incomplete, "Why?" Ren met her eyes for the first time. "Because I once wished I had the courage you did, but I didn't. I couldn't paint what I really felt. And you painted everything. Even when no one was watching." She didn't know whether to thank him, accuse him, or run. She only asked, "Why me?" He was quiet a moment. "Because I saw you once, sketching by the dorm's back wall, when no one else looked. I saw your work in first year and I never forgot it." She bit her lip, her chest tight, not knowing if what she felt was gratitude or fear. "And this exhibition, is it meant to save me?" Ren shook his head. "No. I just wanted you to know. Real talent doesn't need to wait for permission, but if someone can help it breathe, don't turn away." That night she returned to her room with a contract for the exhibition. Just one signature left, hers. She sat at her desk staring at the page as though it were asking something much larger than a name. If she signed, everything would change. Her work would be seen, her name tied to images that once belonged only to her. But if she didn't, would she have the strength to go on with only loneliness as her companion? She picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, but eventually the first stroke of ink met the paper. No applause, no triumph, just a quiet acceptance that sometimes being truly seen isn't a threat but a beginning, a chance to be born again. She signed, not with celebration, not out of a thirst for recognition, but because something quiet had shifted inside her, like an underground spring breaking free after years of silent pressure. After meeting Ren, Yumi spent night after night in the old storage room of the dormitory, once forgotten, now transformed into her studio. It became the space where she finished her final pieces, not for anyone else, not to impress, but simply to tell the stories she still owed herself. She didn't choose the polished ones, not the pieces that had gone viral in that video. She chose old sketches, raw strokes, eyes without names, is without. Together they became something honest, not perfect, but enough for someone to look and maybe see themselves. And then the night came. The gallery glowed under soft golden light, not crowded, but full. The people who came moved with a quiet reverence, no loud chatter, no flashing selfies, no careless commentary. They walked slowly, pausing at each frame as if listening for something that had never been said aloud. Yumi stood at the edge. Not at the center, no introduction, no speech. She simply watched, and for the first time in her life saw her work truly live. Not needing to scream, not needing to be explained. It simply existed and reached the ones it was meant. For her, at one point, a middle-aged woman broke into tears before a drawing of a little girl with hair covering most of her face. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't step back. She stood there, holding the hand of someone beside her. And from across the room, Yumi felt her heart stir. Just a flicker, but enough to remind her. Art sometimes needs no explanation to become essential. Ren didn't come. Yumi wasn't surprised. She wasn't disappointed. Though for a brief moment, she looked toward the door every time it creaked open. But she understood. Presence isn't always in arrival. Sometimes it's in what was planted long before. So she had prepared a single frame, placed at the far end of the hallway where few would look. The painting had no signature, no title, Just the figure of a person standing behind a fogged pane of glass, one hand resting against a damp wall. The face was blurred, but the light in the frame fell precisely across the heart. Beneath the glass, a small, handwritten note. Some people never speak, but they say everything by simply watching. She didn't know if Ren would ever see it, but she knew. It was a gift she needed to give. Not to be answered, but to close something that had been open. For far too long the night ended, people drifted out and the lights dimmed. The gallery returned to its original hush. Yumi was the last to remain. She stood before the very first piece she had ever drawn, now framed in the center of the room. A pair of eyes gazing into the distance. The same eyes, the same quiet. Elk, but this time they were not alone. She reached out, fingertips grazing the frame, not to check it but to offer a final touch. A soft farewell to the version of herself who had once created in the dark. And then she smiled. Softly. Very softly. Not because everything was suddenly right, but because at last she had allowed herself to be seen. The morning after the exhibition, the city woke as it always did. Unmoved, unchanged, at least to the passers-by. But for Yumi, something had shifted. Not loud, not visible. Just a soft loosening in her chest. A breath of quiet space, opening within the tangle of feelings she'd kept pressed down for so long. She hadn't dreamed that night. And that morning she didn't drink coffee, didn't check her email, didn't turn on her phone. She simply pulled on her beige canvas coat, slipped a few paint tubes and brushes into her familiar fabric bag, and walked out of the dormitory. Like someone who finally knew where they were going. For the first time in a long while, Yumi returned to that narrow alley, the one where she used to paint in the dark, breathe between peeling bricks and flickering yellow street lamps once, believing herself completely unseen. But this time she didn't come to hide. She came to step forward. The sun had just risen. A soft band of light filtered between the high-rise buildings. Early morning motorbikes, hurried workers, the call of vendors selling bread, all of it forming a gentle city hum, alive but not overwhelming. She walked into the alley without lowering her head, without shielding her face. For the first time, she let the sunlight touch the hand that held her brush. The wall had aged, more cracks in the bricks, faint traces of what she'd once painted, dreams washed away by rain, wiped clean by passers-by. But today she wasn't here to reclaim the past. She was here to offer something, one final piece, not to keep, to give. And so she began to paint. No sketch, no plan, just brushstrokes flowing from the center of her palm, through to her fingertips, as if her body had been holding this image in silence for years. A little girl, knees drawn to her chest beneath a broken awning. Over her, a narrow beam of sunlight slipped through a gap in the bricks, and beside her a shadow, formless, barely there, but leaning in her direction, not to shield perhaps, but simply to be near. Each stroke was a breath, unrushed, unrevised, undoubted. An older man passing by stopped to watch. A little girl holding her mother's hand stood still, eyes wide. A delivery driver slowed his scooter. No one spoke. No one interrupted. But they all looked, and when the painting was finished, Yumi reached into her bag and took out a tube of white paint, unscrewing the cap slowly, as if this were the most deliberate act of the day. She wrote one line beneath the girl's feet, not bold, not large, but directly where the eye would land. Even shadows can feel the sun, and she didn't sign it. She stepped back, stood in silence, no applause, no compliments, but no one left. As if the image and that single line had whispered something they had all at one time or another, longed to hear, but never found the words to say. A tiny girl, no older than 7, tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked, "Mum, is that lady a real artist?" Yumi turned, smiled. Not the smile of someone discovered, not the shy smile of someone who once ran from being seen, but the quiet smile of someone who had finally set something heavy down and stood up, lighter, deeper. She left the alley just before noon. The sun was high now, sharp against the pavement, but her chest felt unburdened. She no longer needed that wall to hide behind, and she no longer needed anyone to fully understand her. Because in the end, art isn't meant to prove anything. It exists so that someone, even just one person, might see themselves in it and keep going. If you've ever done something you love quietly, unseen, remember this: real value doesn't all come from the spotlight, but from what touches the heart of another. And if this story moved you, like and subscribe to keep walking with me through the beautiful human stories still waiting to be told. A shy girl working the night shift as an admin clerk hands her umbrella to a stranger in the rain, never knowing he's a young millionaire, just beginning to crawl out from under the weight of depression. He never caught her name, but her glance stayed with him. Long after the rain stopped, he spent a fortune trying to find the one person who didn't look away. If it were you, would you turn back? Let's begin from that rain-soaked, fateful evening. The man stood in the rain as if waiting to be found. No umbrella, no movement. Just there, motionless in his soaked suit, at a busy intersection, like someone who'd wandered out of a forgotten scene in an old film. Everyone passed him, by without meeting his eyes, as if they could sense something strange clinging to him. No one asked if he was all right. No one paused, except for one girl and an old umbrella. She saw him from across the street. Rain slipping past her lashes, she stopped, gaze caught on his stillness. Silent. Unmoored. She didn't know why her feet began to move, only that they did, as if something unnamed inside her had been called to attention. There was nothing remarkable about her. No makeup, no statement dress. Just a dark coat, plain jeans, and a battered umbrella with a few bent spokes from too many windy nights. But something in her walk, steady, gentle, seemed to hush the noise around. He didn't even register her presence until she was right in front of him. No words, no questions. She simply opened her umbrella, held it over his head, then slipped the handle into his limp hand. He looked down at the umbrella, then up at her. Their eyes met. And in that moment, it wasn't the umbrella that made him feel sheltered. It was the look. She said nothing. Just gave a small nod and walked away, leaving him standing there, shaking not from the cold but from the shock of such quiet, unexpected grace. The umbrella wasn't special. Grey nylon spotted with faded dots, the handle worn smooth. But in his hands now it felt like a lifeline, something that tethered him for the first time in years to the present. He turned, wanting to call out. But she had already blended into the crowd, her dark coat vanishing into the curtain of rain, her steps quickening, gone around the corner past a bakery. No name, no goodbye. Minutes passed. Still he stood there, umbrella in hand, holding on to the only proof that it had happened. The rain kept falling, but something inside him had shifted. It wasn't romance, not a sudden thunderbolt of love. It was something quieter, stranger, a sense that he'd been given something and didn't know how to give anything back. He didn't know. Who she was is where she came from. But the girl with the umbrella had given him what no one else had in years, the feeling of being truly seen. That night, he came home with the umbrella in hand. He didn't dry it, didn't open it again. He placed it on the table under the warm golden glow of his desk lamp. It stayed there, still wet, still real. He couldn't sleep. The next day he returned to the same intersection. Same time, same place, holding the umbrella, standing in the rain, but she didn't come. He asked nearby vendors, described her, a girl in a dark coat. Could have been anyone. No one remembered, and then something began to change. He, an executive with a schedule packed to the second, spent the following day wandering streets, turning down side roads, scanning crowds. Not because he was curious, but because, in that briefest of moments, something had touched the part of him no one had reached in a very long time. A week later, he posted online, "Very simple message. To the girl who gave me her umbrella and walked away. If you're reading this, that you made me feel seen, and that means more than you could imagine." Attached was a photo of the umbrella. He didn't expect much, but overnight the post was shared thousands of times. People started calling her the Umbrella Girl. Still, she didn't come forward. He stood alone beneath the umbrella she'd left him. No name. No way to find her. Except for one thing, he'd decided he would, no matter how wide the world was. She didn't give me her name, just her umbrella. But somehow, I think that was more than enough. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there staring at the umbrella on his desk. The apartment at night was quiet. Too quiet. Only the low hum of the air conditioner filled the space, a sound he once found soothing. Now, it only made the room colder. The umbrella sat where he had placed it since that rainy day. It had dried but still held the faint scent of damp air and of someone's hair. Barely there, but enough to pull him back again and again. He had forgotten hundreds of faces in his life. None of them ever stayed more than 5 minutes in his memory. But her, the girl with no name, no words, had stilled the entire world with just a look. The next morning he walked into his office as usual, his appearance flawless. But anyone paying close attention would have seen it. Something in his eyes had changed. It was still him. Tailored suit, perfect knot in his tie, footsteps even and sure. But behind the eyes an expanding quiet. A hollow that grew by the hour. He called in his personal assistant. She looked at him, hesitant. He didn't explain, just instructed her to retrieve all the surveillance footage from every street. Camera near the intersection, where he'd stood in the rain. Security teams were mobilized, data collected. No reasons were asked. He told them simply, do it. The first clips arrived by late afternoon. Dozens of angles, hours of grainy footage. He scrolled quickly, eyes fixed on the screen, waiting for the moment, like he needed it to prove to himself that she'd been real. And there she was. In a shaky video, raindrops streaking the lens, he saw her emerge from a shop awning, holding the umbrella, crossing the street. Stepping toward him, she reached him, lifted the umbrella, placed it in his hand, and then she was gone. He rewound, zoomed in, brightened the frame, but there were no clues, no license plates, no clear view of her face. Nothing to trace. Still, he saved the frame as if saving a fragile hope. For the next 3 days, he drove alone through the city streets around that corner. No driver, no guards. He wandered into coffee shops, bookstores, old bakeries, anywhere that might have once felt familiar to someone like her. He asked carefully, had anyone seen a girl like that? Long hair? Slightly timid walk? Someone who once gave an umbrella to a stranger and vanished into the rain. The answers were always the same. Not sure, or worse, no one remembers. On the 4th night he dreamed of her. Not her face, not her voice, but she was there, in the rain, holding the umbrella. This time, she didn't hand it to him. She turned her back, walked away. And as he called out, tried to follow, the rain fell harder. Not water, but memories, crashing like a storm. He woke with the back of his neck damp from sweat, a hollow ache where loss usually lives. Except this was a loss of something he never truly had. His oldest friend and longtime business partner finally asked, "What are you doing?" "Chasing a girl who gave you an umbrella." He didn't know how to answer. So he said quietly, "I've never had anyone cover me from the rain. Not literally. I mean, no one has ever stood in front of me, looked at me and decided to give something without wanting anything back." His friend was silent for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then go. Just don't let this make you forget the rest of the world." He hadn't forgotten. But the rest of the world, meetings, numbers, market shifts, had faded into the background. Something deeper was pulling at him. A question that refused to stop echoing, who is she? And the one that kept him awake. If she appeared once, could she still be out there? He hadn't told anyone else, hadn't posted again, hadn't spoken about it. He just searched, quietly, alone, because the one thing he now knew for sure wasn't where she was. It was that he couldn't let this story end with just an umbrella. 3 weeks had passed since the rain. 3 weeks of searching with nothing to show for it, and all he had left was a grainy frame from a security camera, so blurry he had to imagine the contours of her face as if his memory was trying. to fill in what the lens could not capture. He had walked every street around that intersection, spoken to shop owners, parking attendants. He even hired a private team, asked them to track anyone who matched her build, her long hair, her quiet gait. The results were meaningless. She could have been a student, an office worker, anyone, or no one at all. Once again, he sat in his apartment staring at the umbrella. There was something beneath that dull nylon surface he couldn't let go of, not because she was beautiful, not because the moment was extraordinary, but because for the first time in his life someone gave without asking, without framing it as virtue, without staying to see how it landed. She had left only her presence, like a scent in the air, lingering, shapeless but unmistakably there. And then on another sleepless night he opened his laptop. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but because what he was about to do felt entirely out of his control. He opened his personal account. It was a quiet space, used only for a few articles, a handful of photos. He had no large following, no audience waiting for wisdom or story, which is exactly why he chose it. The post was short, no flourish, no embellishment, just the truth laid out like a memory, an umbrella, a girl with no name, a feeling he still couldn't set down. He ended with one line he didn't edit. If you're out there, if you're reading this, please know, you reminded me that kindness still exists. You reminded me what it's like to be seen. He added a photo, the umbrella resting on the corner of a wooden desk, bathed in soft amber light. No faces, no identities. Then he clicked post. That was all. No expectations, no thoughts of what might come, and he stepped away from the screen. By morning, the post had taken on a life of its own. First a few shares, then dozens, then hundreds. The hashtag #JuchUmbrellaGirl began to appear. Comments poured in, some touched, some skeptical, some playful. Are you sure this happened? I hope she reads this. And he said nothing, just watched. Elsewhere in the city, a young woman woke up, made herself a cup of jasmine tea, her usual quiet ritual, and opened her social feed. She wasn't expecting anything. Then the post appeared, suggested, trending, just a photo of an umbrella, a paragraph she almost scrolled past until the first line landed, and then time slowed, each word, each sentence. They felt like they'd been lifted directly from her own memory. She froze at the line. She didn't give me her name, just her umbrella. But somehow that was more than enough. Her hand trembled. She set the teacup. Down, not broken, just unsteady. She read it again and knew there was no mistake. She didn't know how to feel. Part of her felt a quiet relief, as if something heavy she'd been carrying alone had been softly named by someone else. Another part was terrified because she knew one comment, one message, one reply, and nothing would ever go back to how it was. She wasn't good at being seen. All her life she'd chosen the corners. At parties, the dim spots near the wall. In class, the back row. She'd survived through quiet, through softness, and the one time she'd stepped forward, offering an umbrella to a stranger, this had happened. She pulled her phone closer, opened the comment box, typed, "I think I might be her," then deleted it. Typed again. "I was there that day. It was raining. I left the umbrella. I left the..." Deleted. She sighed, closed the app, opened it again, then again. In the end, she shut her laptop, didn't respond. But that night, she read the post again, and the next night, and the night after. Each new share, each new comment, made her feel like someone was standing just beyond a lit doorway, calling her name. Han Shibi stood on the other side of the glass, not sure if she could step in. He still didn't know she had read it. She still didn't know if she'd ever have the courage to answer. But something had shifted between them. Something unseen had stretched, a thread unnamed but felt, an echo of something they both thought had ended. Night fell softly. In the amber glow of a small lamp, she sat at her worn wooden desk, fingers brushing over the blank pages of her notebook. The curtains fluttered gently in the breeze, slipping through a cracked window. There was no sound, but the tap of wind against glass and the slow, steady ticking of a clock. Her phone lit up again. That post, the one being shared thousands of times, still sat there waiting, like it was holding its breath, asking her to do something she hadn't yet dared to do. There are things we never expect to haunt us, like giving a stranger an umbrella or disappearing without looking back. She thought suddenly of her younger self in university. Her hair had been longer then, her face rounder, full of that soft, aching hope that if she tried hard enough, someone might one day truly see her. Once, she had been assigned a class presentation, the first she'd prepared all on her own. She wore a grey pleated skirt that day, stepped forward with confidence, but her voice trembled. One word slipped. A sentence faltered. Soft laughter rose from the back of the room. Not cruel, but not kind either. After that, she never volunteered again, never raised her hand, never gave anyone the chance to look at her too long. Because when they did, they always looked. Away, elsewhere in the city, he too could not sleep. In his hand, the umbrella. On the table beside him, the printed frame from that fleeting moment of surveillance footage. He had searched everywhere, but all he'd found was silence. He didn't know her name, but she had arrived in his memory like a sudden wind through summer, brief, chill and unforgettable. She tapped the notebook cover with her fingertip, rhythmic, steady, as if waiting for a thought that was running late. She had spent her whole life trying not to disturb anyone, learn to step lightly and speak softly, not take up space, like when she was 10 and got lost in a supermarket. She didn't cry, didn't call for her mother, just stood, silently by a rack of cereal, hoping her mother would remember and come back. But she didn't. A store clerk found her and brought her to security. When her mother finally came, she only said, "Why didn't you say something?" That question had stayed with her ever since, and he kept dreaming of rain, this time flashing red lights, her sharp screech of tires, a sound from the past still too loud. He'd been 14, sitting in the passenger seat when the accident happened. He and his mother had argued over a failed math test he was too ashamed to bring home. He'd planned to apologize. He never got the chance and she never woke up. Since then, he lived with the knowledge that people can vanish in a blink. That words left unsaid don't disappear. They collect like condensation on glass, blurry, cold, unwiped. She had once had someone, almost a co-worker during an internship, who always shared lunch with her. He'd once said, "You make people want to protect you." She had smiled. Later, when she finally opened up, shared her fears, her doubts, he began to pull away. Not all at once, just slowly. People don't leave in grand exits. They fade, so she had learned to leave first. He opened a blank document, typed a few lines, deleted them. This would have been his first post about her, the girl who gave him what no one ever had, kindness, without a reason, not love, not destiny, just presence, at the right time, and disappearance, at a time he recognized all too well. She read the post again. Each word tapped gently at something beneath her skin. Not painful, just hidden. She didn't know if she should feel sorrow or something quieter. There was a trace of grief, but also a strange sense of being, like she existed, if only in someone else's memory. She wrote in her journal, "He doesn't know who I am, but he saw the part of me others always looked past." Then she stopped, closed the notebook. The night passed like a long breath. No one texted, no one called, no one knocked. Only the post remained, still being shared, still unanswered. But in that silence, something began to shift. Girl who once chose to disappear was now wondering if she might appear. And a man who had always expected loss was learning for the first time how to wait. That night he couldn't sleep. Not exactly because he missed her, but because of the questions that had begun gnawing at him from the inside. Did she know he was looking for her? Had she read the piece? And if she had, why the silence? That silence wasn't a no, but it wasn't a yes either. It lived in the blur between possibilities, leaving him unmoored, unsure whether to stop or take one more step forward. He sat in the dark, the laptop half open, its dim light casting a glow on the umbrella, still there, untouched, quiet as a door never reopened. The message came just before dawn, a time suspended between sleep and waking. He saw the notification blink onto the screen. Is this her? Just one line. No name, no profile picture. Beneath it, a link. He'd gotten dozens of messages like this. Most were fake, strangers spinning stories, cropping random images, even using AI to recreate her face with the umbrella. But this one felt different, not because of the words, because of the feeling. He clicked the link. The screen shifted to a vertical phone video. The footage was grainy, unsteady, but the scene hit him like a wave to the chest. A bus stop. Wind tearing through. The rain had just let up. A girl stood alone. A grey canvas bag held close. Her long hair fell over one shoulder. She didn't turn her face, but the shape of her, the way she moved, each tiny gesture made his heart hammer. She looked off into the distance, then stepped onto the number 27 bus. The door shut behind her. The video ended, not even 10 seconds, but enough to upend his world. He shot up, grabbed his keys, left without a coat. He drove on instinct. Called the number from the video, no answer. Weak signal, just static. Half an hour later, he reached the bus stop. No one there. Just the digital sign counting down to the next arrival. And a faint streak of water on the pavement, like a footprint, still wet. He stood there, breathless and heart pounding. His hands clenched the steering wheel until they turned white. He asked the ticket seller nearby. No one remembered. Just that some girl had boarded a bus half an hour earlier. No one knew her name. No one paid attention. He checked the schedule, tracked the number 27 route, but deep down he knew it was pointless. In a city of millions, a trace like that could lead nowhere. He returned to where she'd stood, stepped into the very place. The rain had started again, soft, sparse, like emotions that hadn't yet found names. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly tired. On the way home, he didn't turn on the music, didn't touch the radio. Just let the wind rush through the cracked window. The umbrella sat in the passenger seat. Occasionally it tipped sideways, but he didn't fix it. Let it lie there, just like what he felt inside. Off balance, shapeless. That night, he didn't update the post, didn't check the comments. He just replayed the short clip, over and over each time, trying to catch something the eye might miss. A flicker in her shoulder, the slight nod as she boarded, the delicate way she brushed her hair back. Each detail like proof. It was her. Across the city, she had no idea the video had spread. Didn't know someone was watching her image again and again. She only remembered the light rain, waiting for the bus like any other day, and a man nearby on the phone, his eyes darting, frantic. She had looked at him just for a second, then turned away, because she still wasn't sure if she was ready to be found. The night passed, and for the first time since she vanished into the rain, he felt the distance between them shrink. But maybe that closeness made the pain sharper, so close and then gone again. Though the video lasted less than 10 seconds, he had watched it dozens of times over the past 3 days. Each time, he paused at the moment she stood still at the bus stop, hair falling softly over her shoulder, arms wrapped around a small canvas bag, gaze fixed on something unknowable in the distance. He couldn't see her face clearly, but there was something in the way she stood, in the hush of that frame, that made his heart ache, because he knew it was her. And then she was gone. Again, for 3 weeks after that, he nearly gave up. The calls, the messages from strangers, the countless leads that led nowhere, all of them delivered him back to the beginning. In his apartment, the umbrella remained in its usual spot, now covered in a faint layer of dust, like the grief he still didn't know how to name. He no longer expected anything. Until one rainy afternoon, his assistant forwarded him an invitation to a charity art show. It was being held in a converted warehouse not far from the location in the video. He didn't know why, but he said yes, maybe it was the place. Maybe it was the sliver of him that still held on to the hope, that if she truly was somewhere nearby, there was a chance, however small, that they might walk into the same room, even by accident. And that would be enough. The gallery was raw and quiet, its concrete walls softened by warm yellow light that spilled gently over abstract paintings hung with deliberate asymmetry. Guests wandered softly through the space, sipping wine, exchanging small smiles and murmurs, their voices never rising above the faint jazz playing overhead. He arrived early. No one paid him any attention, something he was quietly grateful. For he didn't want to be noticed, he just wanted to watch, to look. Without being seen, she was there too. She hadn't known he would come. She'd agreed to help a friend with the guest table, assuming it would be the most inconspicuous job, just nodding and smiling, nothing more. She stood near the entrance wearing a pale cream sweater, her hair loosely tied back, no makeup. But there was a quiet clarity to her that made people glance twice without realizing why. And then they saw each other. There was no warning, no movement to catch the eye. Just in the moment he passed by, their eyes met. And time, like a habit long unbroken, paused, thread thin and still. He knew her immediately, and not by her face and not by her shape, but by the feeling. That same quiet gravity, like the breath of early winter, had once surrounded him in the rain. She knew him too, from the very first glance, and the feeling of being seen, not in the way people fear, but the way someone gently sees through you, made her falter just slightly. They stood frozen. For a few seconds, while the world moved around them, while the music played and voices murmured, they just stood there, looking. No words, no smiles, no nods, but in their eyes everything. He walked toward her slowly. She didn't move away. Didn't step forward either. They stopped just close enough to hear each other's breath if either of them dared to exhale. He opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated. He didn't know where to begin. He had rehearsed this moment so many times, imagining himself saying, "I was looking for you," or "Thank you for the umbrella," or simply, "Hello." But now, with her actually there, everything disappeared. She lowered her gaze slightly, eyes still locked with his. Her fingers tightened around the guest list in her hands, as if it were the only thing holding her steady. They both turned toward a nearby painting, a white canvas streaked with flowing colors, undefined, empty, and somehow haunting. They stood side by side, saying nothing, needing nothing, just the shared existence of being there at the same time. A few minutes passed, or maybe a lifetime. No names were asked, no rain was mentioned, no posts brought up, but when they stepped away, he toward the gallery's inner rooms, she back to her post, they both knew they had found each other. Truly. That night, she sat in front of her phone and reread his old post. She still didn't respond, but for the first time, her hands didn't tremble when she opened the page. That night, he sat in his familiar apartment and placed the umbrella back in its old spot. But this time, he didn't linger over it. Because for the first time, in many days, what tightened his chest wasn't a memory. It was a possibility. Some eyes don't look at you. They find you. Sometimes the ones we're searching for don't need to say a word. They just have to stand still and look at us with the kind of gaze that quiets everything else. After the exhibition, neither of them called. No messages, no emails, no apologies, no promises to meet again. But both of them knew everything had changed. He continued living his usual rhythm, morning coffee, meetings, the quiet return to his apartment. Yet now every space he passed through held a faint echo. Someone had once stepped into his silence and left behind a resonance. She didn't slip back into hiding either. She read his post one last time, then closed it, then opened it again, then closed it. Each time she edged closer to something she had spent years avoiding. She knew she couldn't choose to disappear anymore. A week after the exhibition, he received a short message. "Do you have time for coffee?" Tomorrow afternoon, no name, no context, but he knew it was her. He stared at the message in silence. His heart beat softly, like footsteps approaching the door of a heart long left waiting, hesitating just outside. The cafe she chose was tucked into a narrow alley, almost hidden behind an old bookstore. The space was quiet, the lighting gentle, the scent of wood and roasted coffee blending into something quietly warm. He arrived early, sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup gone cold. When she walked in, he didn't see her right away, but the soft, familiar trace of her scent made him turn. She wore a white shirt, a grey cardigan draped over her shoulders. Her hair hung loose around her face, unadorned by makeup. She looked exactly like the woman he had missed every single day. She smiled, shyly, almost apologetically. He stood, gestured to the seat across from him. No words. None needed. The first few minutes were quiet, but not the quiet of discomfort. The quiet of two people relearning each other, through glances, through breath, through the spaces that once stretched between them like a whole season of rain. She was the first to speak. "I didn't think I'd miss you," she said, her voice light, utterly sincere. "I didn't think something that small it would make someone write an entire piece." He smiled, softly like sunlight slipping through after long days of rain. "I didn't think an umbrella could make me search for someone this much." They both laughed. She told him about a class when she was 19, how she lost her voice during her first presentation, and how the quiet laughter from the back of the room made her shrink inside herself for years. About feeling like background texture in most relationships, never quite special enough to be held onto, never quite awful enough to be let go. About her fear of being seen, truly seen by someone. He listened like each word was a breeze brushing across some dry, long-forgotten landscape inside him. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. Only when she paused to breathe did he speak gently. "I lost my mother too because of something I didn't say in time." She looked up. "I meant to apologize to her that day, but I didn't make it. And ever since, I've been afraid of losing something before I'm brave enough to hold on to it." She said nothing, just looked at him. A long, quiet look. Then she said, "I'm not good at staying, but today I came." The conversation stretched past 2 hours, not too many words, not too many details, just enough for someone to quietly open an old door and find that there was still light inside. As they stood to leave, she hesitated. "I won't disappear," she said, voice trembling but true. He didn't ask, "Are you sure?" He simply nodded, as if fulfilling a promise that had been waiting patiently to be spoken aloud. That evening he returned home and reopened his old post. For the first time, he set it to private. Didn't delete it. Just put it away. Because what he had been looking for was no longer out there. That day the wind picked up early. The sky turned grey in that familiar way, its muted light making everything outside the window seem to slow, as if the world had slipped into a gentler, more deliberate dimension. He sat quietly in the small kitchen, fingers absently circling a cup of cold coffee, his gaze resting on the edge of the table, on the thin cloth she'd forgotten the day before. He didn't text her. Not because he forgot, but because he knew. If she wanted to come back, she would find her way. Outside, the rain began to fall, light and scattered, as though even the sky was unsure whether to pour its heart out or merely brush the earth's surface with hesitation. At 4 in the afternoon, he stepped out, umbrella in hand. He returned to the same cafe, where they'd once sat for hours, speaking of things no one else had ever been allowed to hear. The window was fogged with a fine mist. Inside, blurred figures moved slowly, like characters in an old film reel turned down to half speed. But this time he didn't go inside. He stood beneath the awning, holding a new umbrella, a soft grey one, wooden handle, thick fabric, sturdy frame. Not the same as the one she'd given him in the first rain, but similar enough that anyone looking closely would feel its echo. He opened the umbrella as the first drops fell, not to stay dry, but to wait the right way. She arrived at 10 to 5, not hurried, not hesitant, and not hidden as she had been in their earlier encounters. She simply walked slowly around the corner, wearing a thin coat, no umbrella, hair damp and clinging lightly to her cheek. She stopped just 3 steps from him. Neither spoke. He tilted the umbrella toward her, a small gesture but complete. She stepped beneath its cover, as though she had been standing there all along, only waiting to realize it. In that moment, the umbrella was no longer just an object. It was a bridge, a language, the first touch without touching. "You didn't bring an umbrella?" he asked, his voice low, warm. She shook her head, eyes still on the rain. "Because I knew someone else would." The words were soft as breath, yet they melted every last space between them. There was no need to hold hands, no need for an embrace, but something had begun, invisibly, irreversibly. They walked together, no talk of the past, no mention of the aches they'd once carried. Each step stitching something closed, not with thread but with presence. Rain tapped gently against the umbrella, a quiet rhythm like a lullaby. Outside, the world remained loud. But beneath this umbrella there was a small private world, where 2 people once lost to each other found their way back without asking, "Why did you look for me?" Or, "Did you ever miss me?" That night, back home, he placed the old umbrella, the one she once handed him in the rain, into a wooden box, not to forget, but to keep, because what he carried now was no longer a thing. It was a person who had walked toward him and had not walked away again. It wasn't the umbrella that kept them dry in the rain. It was the warmth between them, the kind that made the cold disappear. Thank you for walking with us to the end of this story. If you've ever felt like the girl, quiet, unseen, alone, or like the boy, trying to hold on to something small because it made you feel alive, then I hope this story has been a little umbrella for you, sheltering you through your own rain. If gentle, lingering love stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in the next quiet journey. Subscribe. Now for more love stories as soft as rain and just as quiet as the heart.